They're nice people. So first off, we have Larry Bradley. Larry is originally from Springfield, Missouri. He's had a number of careers. He was his first career was in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer. He split his time between combat units and Army research and development. And it says here, most notably being on the fielding team for the Bradley fighting vehicle. Different Bradley though, right? Yeah. His second career was in sales, highlighted by being with Gateway Computers when they were a Fortune 500 company, and where Larry's nickname was the Doctor of Sales. Larry's third career began when he wrote a book about nonpartisan politics, which led to his interest in election reform. Larry has a BA in political science from Missouri State University and an MBA from the University of Tennessee. And we also have with us Dr. Rachel McNair. Dr. McNair has lived in Kansas City since 1972, graduated as valedictorian from Paseo High School, received her PhD in psychology and sociology from the University of Missouri at Kansas City, currently makes her living by statistics consulting primarily for dissertation students, and has expertise and experience in how to run surveys. So these people know a lot more than me, so I'm going to let them come up here and talk about what they're going to talk about. Larry and Dr. McNair.
Thank you all very much. Let's see. Do you have the clicker? Great. Rachel and I have been advocates of election reform and ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting, for some time now. We appreciate, really do, the opportunity to appear here and hopefully provide you with some new perspectives. We attended your meeting at Lake of the Ozarks in June, found it to be very informative. Let's see, this will change. There we go. This slide shows the basic idea of how ranked choice voting works. But going back to our event in June, I want to share one insight in particular. When I was in the Army, I had a job once that was a particularly difficult job, and I had a senior officer who recognized the difficulty of that job, and he said to me, you know, you got the kind of job where if everything goes right, that's the way it's supposed to be. And if anything goes wrong, it's your fault. So I especially want to mention that because we said less in the presentation, it occurred to me that you folks have the same kind of job that I used to have. If everything goes right, why, that's the way it's supposed to be. But if anything goes wrong, it's your fault, right? So I wanted to bring that up because I want you to know what we have for you today is a critique of the process that we're forced to use because of the kind of ballot we use. What we want to do is to show you how RCV can give us a better process that benefits everyone. I have always advocated RCV because I believe RCV enables more effective and efficient government. I give talks on this topic to civic groups, colleges, and universities. That changed when a presentation I did in the fall of 2018 gave me a new perspective on the benefits of ranked choice voting, or RCV. When I finished my presentation, the sponsoring professor made these comments to me and her students. The professor was also a law school instructor, and she said, you know, in a jury trial, there are two forms of justice. One is the verdict, and the other is the process by which you obtain the verdict. And if the process by which you obtain the verdict is unjust, then the verdict is unjust. And what this man is showing us is that the process by which we run our elections is unjust. And if we continue to use a system that is unjust, then we are contributing to a growing feeling in our society that our government is illegitimate. A feeling of illegitimate government is, of course, a dangerous one to have growing. But I realized that my advocacy was not only because of a desire for increased effectiveness and efficiency, but also needed to ward off the growing feeling that government is illegitimate. So, of course, right now at this point, you're all saying, asking yourselves, what in the world did you show those students and that professor that caused her to say that? And what I did, the answer to that is that I asked a series of questions to cause people to focus on the fairness of the process. I didn't show data that proves the process is both unfair and not giving voters the results they want to get. The questions I ask are these. So, first, do you or do you not believe that in a representative form of government such as ours, the policies of that government should be a reflection of the will of the majority within the bounds of the Constitution? Okay, so your first thought is that must be a trick question. Okay, but think about it. Do you want policy that reflects the will of the minority? No. Do you want policy that is outside the bounds of the Constitution? No. So, again, if those answers are no, with those clarifications, we determine the answer to the first question is yes. We do want policies that reflect the will of the majority within the bounds of the Constitution. That leads to the second question. Given that the answer to the first question is yes, then should one of the purposes of our elections be to determine what the will of the majority is? Logically, the answer is yes again, and leads to my third question. How do elections determine the will of the majority? My answer to that is by only allowing majority winners. One of the key phrases in the Declaration of Independence is consent of the governed. When we have an election, we are determining who will sit in the seats of our legislative and executive branches, who will vote yes or no on policy, laws, budgets, and judges. If we have people sitting in those seats who occupy those seats without a majority vote in either their primary or the general election, then can we truly say that they have the consent of the government? I would submit no. So here's my last question. If our election should determine what the will of the majority is, then why aren't our elections doing that? Let me remind you that a majority winner is someone who gets 50% plus one or better of the votes cast, and a plurality winner just has more votes than the other candidates. Let me show you 3 quick examples from real live elections here. First is an example from, pardon me? It's right, okay. First is an example from another state. In fact, all of the examples I'm going to show you here are from out of state. I deliberately did that to hopefully not raise any partisan hackles here to show this. And another comment I want to make real quick that wasn't in our script, but I'll say this. We think ranked choice voting should be used in primaries, and there should be primaries. I know you passed a resolution last year, and we looked at the language, and we don't understand why you would say there's not primaries. We want there to be primaries, except maybe in local elections. We'll talk about that later. Okay, but as you see here from this example, no one got a majority. This state has a law that even a plurality winner must get at least 35% of the vote to win. And that didn't happen here. So the state required the party to hold a meeting to determine the winner. At the meeting, 513 party delegates overrode almost 43,000 voters. David, who finished 5th out of 6th in the balloting in the election, was given the nomination. This was all done in accordance with rules and laws of the party and the state, but it is a prime example, I think, of why we need a more modern ballot process. Let's look at another one here. This is Nebraska in 2014, the gubernatorial election. The Republicans had 6 candidates competing for the nomination. As you can see, none of the candidates came close to getting the majority. Mr. Ricketts got 26.56% of the vote, and Mr. Bruning got 25.49% of the vote. Only 2,170 votes separated the two. Had ranked choice voting been in effect, the results might clearly have been different, because all those votes below the top 2 candidates would have bubbled up to see who was actually the consensus majority choice. Third, here are the results of the Kansas 2018 Republican gubernatorial primary election. In this instance, Mr. Kobach beat Mr. Collier by 349 votes, and neither one of them got even close to having a majority. Instead, they each got about 40% of the vote. There were almost 60,000 votes left twisting in the wind with no way to weigh in on which of the two they might prefer. RCV would have done that. So again, I submit that if one of the purposes of our elections is to determine what the will of the majority is, then the tool we are using namely the winner-take-all ballot, is inadequate for the task. The tool that does meet the task and gives voters the guaranteed result of a majority winner is the ranked choice ballot. Other states and municipalities have already made or are making the shift to RCD. Maine, in particular, has made the leap. We would like to see Missouri do the same. Now, one of the concerns we hear about making the leap is that voters will consider RCD to be too complicated and they would prefer to vote with the ballot we use now. We had anecdotal evidence that wasn't true, but only anecdotal. So we decided to go out and generate some real data. So Rachel's going to come up and tell you what happened when we went after the hard data. When Rachel's done, we'll take questions. Rachel.
Okay, this is why I had in my introduction that I do have expertise on surveys. We had this survey done just in the nick of time at the polling places for the presidential primary on March 10th, before things shut down in Kansas City. Now, this is an all Kansas City survey. We approached voters coming out of 14 polling places. We asked if they preferred Democrat, Republican, or Green ballot, because those were the ones that had 3 or more candidates, and then gave them a paper with the exact same choice of candidates that they had just voted on. But instead of voting for just one, they were to rank their choices up to 5 candidates. Then, having given them a taste of the difference between one choice they had just made and the ability to rank options, we asked, did they like it? And did they find it easy? They answered on a 1 to 5 scale. Whoops. There we go. And we got 944 people to complete the surveys. As you can see, very strong majorities liked or strongly liked the exercise, and even more thought it was easy or very easy. These are the polling places we covered. I don't expect you to read it, of course, I'm just documenting. Good geographic spread, north and south, east and west and central. Further analysis showed that there wasn't much difference between their answers and what part of the city they were voting in. Here I give results in more detail. As you can see, a solid majority strongly liked it, 54%, with another good set that merely liked it, and dislike was rather weak. Here are the detailed results on the question about ease. There were enough people who found it somewhat difficult to suggest, somewhat, let me do that again. There were enough people who found it somewhat difficult to suggest voter education will be needed, but remember, for most of these voters, this was the first time they'd ever encountered this, and they were doing it on the spot because a stranger asked them to a minute ago. All this backs up evidence we have from all over the country. They've used ranked choice voting in the state of Maine and in several large cities. 5 states used it in their Democratic presidential primaries this year. It's used in over 50 colleges to choose student leaders, and it's used to select the Oscars. It will be voted on in Alaska, Massachusetts, and several cities this November. Then in Blue Springs, Missouri, they had a 4-way mayor's race in June. The Missouri House representative for that district, Dan Stacy, who is here today, ran a survey that had exiting voters rank the candidates they had just voted on, and he got 222 voters to respond. This illustrates, and the response on ease was about the same. Liking was close. This illustrates another important point, though, if you see how this came out. The man who got 34.3% of the actual vote in the actual election also got 35% of the first choice votes from the sample. Now, if the election had gone the same way as the sample did, then he would have won with a clear majority support rather than winning with a third. But note, ranked choice voting means we can distinguish between the one where a huge portion of the majority says, well, he's not my first choice, but he's okay, from the candidate that has an enthusiastic third in his corner, but is hated by the vast majority. The current system doesn't allow us to distinguish between the two. This is one of many studies. What experience shows is that voter satisfaction is high and turnout is improved. We're not dealing with just an idea that some people hold philosophically. We've had experience, the experience is positive, and we think quite likely this is the wave of the future. Now we'd like to ask two things from you. One is if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer. The other thing is that we really want to hear from you, the people who would be dealing with voters directly, about any aspects that you'd like to be sure were included or left out. Like, we already know you don't want an unfunded mandate, that's obvious. We work closely with the legislators writing the bills and the people drafting a possible future initiative petition, so your feedback can help us be in sync with your concerns as experts on running elections. Thank you. Oh, I might mention, I just this afternoon went and checked with the voting machine people and said, well, your machine can do ranked choice voting. It's like, oh, well, yeah, of course. I mean, you know, you just put in the software like everything. If anybody has any concerns about needing new equipment, if you have equipment that's fairly recent, all of the recent voting machines have ranked choice voting capability. St. Louis, I'm afraid, is an exception, but for the rest of Missouri, mainly your machines already do have capability, so there's not a huge expense or trouble with that. Any questions or feedback?
I have one question.
Yeah.
How do you propose for the ballots, the ranking ballots to be tabulated for a contest that is in more than one jurisdiction? How do you do the counting on the ranking? Have you thought about that yet? I think that's the big option. The actual implementation.
I think you just have to, you're going to have to run an algorithm on a set of computers. And so I think you're thinking, well, you're looking at St. Louis too here, even like here in Kansas City, we have 3 counties involved in the city of Kansas City. So you're going to have to bring in the raw data to a central location, and the election board is going to have to run that data through a computer algorithm program in order to determine the winner.
Which election?
I would presume the Kansas City election board would have the predominance here. Yeah. Now, for all of Missouri, to a certain degree, it's the same as it is right now. That is to say, all of you counties gather up all the data from all your precincts, you consolidate that, and you send it to Jefferson City. And then there's an addition program that goes on there. And so I would see basically the same tenet. In other words, there's a worry perhaps that it's going to mean more work for you. But really, it's the software on the machines. They'll consolidate the raw data with what everybody's first, second, third choice was. For example, maybe governor, okay? It all comes into Jefferson City. They consolidate it into one database and then run the program. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you have other questions? Eric?
Well, I mean, right now we don't send data to the Secretary of State's office. Like in our case, they just screen scrape it from a PDF that's on our website. So there would need to be, I would think, some kind of common data format first of all, and then some kind of tabulator at the state level, which would be new. We also have the issue of local contests, school districts, and so
Clearly. And that's why we're appreciative of being able to come here and talk to you about the mechanics of doing it. But it's all in an investment in being able to avoid the kind of things I was showing you on the screen up here, where you have people getting nominations with 25% of the vote. And let's flip that, you know, in other words, if somebody gets a nomination with 25, 26% of the vote, that means there's 74, 76% of people, the members of that party, who were opposed to that person getting the nomination, and no recourse. And even more, I would say, what does your party stand for? Well, if you have a situation where somebody could win with 26% of the ballot, that means your party stands for whatever that 26% candidate says it stands for. Okay? Instead of having a consensus majority choice, who wins with 50% in this way or that. Okay.
No, that is excellent. Thank you very much for that, because I mean, we look at the voters' end. This survey was entirely what happens at the voters' end. We didn't even explain how the tabulation is done. But obviously that's going to be a major concern to make sure it runs smoothly. Any other questions or feedback? Yes.
I've watched some of the videos on how this works, and in some of those races, what you showed up there, the person that received the most votes also got the 51%. And
Right.
I saw some situations where that didn't happen.
Right.
So here's what I'm saying, or how I feel, and we're gonna agree to disagree on this, and we're gonna have a good discussion. But people play games. We have open primaries in Missouri. So you'll get, in my county, McDonald County, we're primarily Republican. A Democrat cannot win a primary or a general as a Democrat. So they ran as Republicans. I see a situation where you've got this ranked choice voting that, let's say Democrat will vote for Democrat, and then they'll drop down to Libertarian, Green, whatever, just so that their candidate has a stronger chance of winning against the Republican. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I don't know how to explain it, but to me, it's just another opportunity for people to play this game.
All right. Now, when you say, let me clarify with you. And that's a good question for everybody. I'm glad you asked. Okay. When you say that the candidate who didn't get as many votes wins, okay, are you referring to the fact that on the first pass, okay, that the initial candidate, that there was a split in the vote, and maybe they finished second or third, but the one who was initially in the lead ends up losing? Is that your issue? Okay, all right. And again, what we're trying to say is nobody, what was it? I was just thinking this the other day to say this stuff. Y'all remember Les Brown, the motivational speaker? You know, he has a line that says, you know, it ain't over until I win. My apologies to Les, because I can't do the line like he does. But what we're saying is, it ain't over until somebody gets 50% plus one or better. Okay? And so no longer do we accept. Right now we accept this because runoff elections are too expensive. And even if you did run off a runoff election, all the people who lost, all their supporters who lost, most of them wouldn't show up for that runoff election. So with a ranked choice ballot, while we got everybody there, we tell everybody, okay, who's your first choice, who's your second, and if in other words, who's your first choice, and if the first choice doesn't win, who do you want your vote to transfer if nobody gets 50% plus one or better? Because I mean, that's the whole thing right at the beginning. If somebody gets 50% plus one or better on the first pass, it's done, it's over. We have a winner. Thank you for playing. Okay? But it's only when we don't have 50% plus one or better that this process kicks in. And we start saying, okay, nobody got 50%, so-and-so's eliminated, all of you people who voted for so-and-so, who's your second choice? We're asking that not physically, we're going to their ballot electronically and making the choice around. Does that make sense? Okay, so when it comes up down, so what we do, we have, ideological consolidation. Last night, they got the final results for our primary in Massachusetts. 6 candidates running for a congressional seat. And as it was put to me, 5 of them were progressive candidates, Massachusetts being a progressive state, and 1 of them was a moderate. The progressive candidates split the vote amongst the progressive vote, and the moderate was elected because they had no way to consolidate amongst the progressives and say, who's your first choice? Who's your consolidated choice that'll get 50% plus more better? Am I making sense again? Okay. So again, this is what we've got to change in our outlook on elections. It's first past the post. It's the I'm sorry. It's the horse race. We've got to get rid of that horse race mentality. Okay. And go to the other aspect of 50% plus one or better. Again, I appreciate your question. That's an excellent question. You want to say something?
Well, another of the things that they found is that you get the candidates, right now you have candidates A, B, and C, and A and B are kind of close to each other. And the current system encourages them to demonize each other because they want to get each other's voters. What happens with ranked choice voting is the candidate A knows that anybody who is not persuaded to give that candidate first choice, if they give candidate B first choice instead, candidate A still has a good chance of getting second choice and wants that second choice, and therefore will not attack candidate B and turn off all candidate B's first choice voters. So, what you have in your specific case, you have somebody who votes Democrat and then gives their second choice to Green and their third choice to Libertarian. The thing is, if that's what that voter believes they most want, then that voter has communicated what it is they most want. And it comes out. And how much that matters for the Green and Libertarian candidate is simply going to matter on how many people do choose to give them their second, third option. And if very few people do, then not much happens. And if more do, then that's democracy.
I see Rick standing here with a hook, and that's okay. If you notice up here, we have our contact information. We're very happy to do a Zoom call. We're also very happy to travel to come do this presentation to people in your area and address the very kind of questions that you're asking here. Okay? So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Are we ready over there?